Hey guys, so today we're talking about Tan Car's trailing arm. As you can see in this picture, part of the trailing arm is starting to snap off. This is the face plate that sandwiches between the knuckle. It's part of the trailing arm as you can see, but this failure was causing the left rear tire to toe in, and this is kind of a bad thing. And you can see in this slide here, toe of a tire is basically just the lateral turning capability of a tire. In Tan Car, the rear tires aren't supposed to toe at all, but as you can see in the far right picture, this is kind of what Tan Car was doing. The left tire was towing in while the right tire, since that trailing arm was still working, was not. So this is what we were aiming at fixing today.
Okay, so here we have the trailing arm for the left rear suspension of Tan Car. The problem with the trailing arm was that the mounting plate broke, so it fractured along this line where it connects to the hub. This line here. So this entire plate had to be removed and re-welded. So to get it ready for welding and replacement, we had to remove all of this material here, and we used an angle grinder to cut it away and then get closer into these lines. And then to finish off and prep it for welding, we used a wire wheel to really finish these edges on the inside here, and then the surrounding parts of the actual plate where it was going to be welded. So here is an example. This is actually a spare plate, and there were two left over. So what we did was we cut away this excess material here. Generally, this would fold along this perforated edge at this edge here, and it would fold down, and this is where the mounting bracket is. But we only needed this part, so we cut away this material here. You can see the excess. And then we used the remaining to weld onto the trailing arm. Yeah. And as you can see, the welds were put on the inside of the bracket, all along the edges here, and again on the outside. So next we'll show you how to assemble the suspension. Alright, when we were mounting the plate on, to find the correct angle to mount it at, we had the other trailing arm, which is not broken, and we used a digital angle finder to find the angle to weld it. So you start by putting it on a flat surface and zeroing and placing it on the next surface, and then we get a reading of 32.3, so we know what angle to weld the plate on as. Okay, so we'll give you a quick overview of suspension system. Here we have Big Chungus, which is being used to raise up Tan Car. We have a trailing arm, which you already know, fits in here. We also have the shock, this is our air shock, control arms, upper and lower, the upper and lower control arms. And then we have the axle, which is where the power comes from. Here we have our spindle, which goes through the center of the hub. This is the brake caliper, which mounts on the rotor and stops the rotor from spinning. Here's the hub, the rotor that we mentioned, and the spindle goes through here. And then the wheel is actually mounted on the front of this.
Okay, so connecting trailing arm to the frame we're going to use one washer on the very outside, two washers on either side of this, inside this bracket, and then on the other side we don't need another washer because this bolt has one already.
So to tighten it, we're using an adjustable wrench to hold the bolt that you can't see in place, and a ratchet on this side. Okay, so we are putting the shock on the trailing arm now.
Yeah, so
Trailing arm, shock.
so there's a space in here, and these two spacers need to go on either side of that, in between this space here. So there's a bigger one and a smaller one. We're going to put the bigger one on the inside, the smaller one on the outside, just because we did that on the other side, so we're going to try and match it.
Here, pull it up towards you. Pull the shock.
Okay, well that's the general gist of how this goes. Once we get the bolt through, we'll then put a nut on this side, tighten it down, and that'll be good to go. Okay, so now we have the trailing arm and the knuckle together.
With the spindle through the center.
Yep.
Connect the
So
axle.
now we're going to, there's 5 bolts that go here, 6 holes for 5 bolts. So we're going to basically bolt through 5 of these through the trailing arm into the knuckle, and then we'll put a nut on the back side to clamp it all together, and then we'll put the other pieces onto the front of that.
Okay, so this is the screw and spacer for the caliper, and it's going to go right here. Caliper will mount on this end, and the edge of the holes of the caliper are threaded, so it doesn't need a nut because it'll just thread into it and seal itself. So we're about to mount the hub onto the spindle, and after that we will place the caliper on the rotor. We'll mount it here and clamp it on the rotor.
There's also 2 super small clips that are on the actual brake pads that we need to make sure are aligned.
The brake pads are also a little bit compressed, so you need to use a flathead to open up the brake pad so you can fit over the rotor. These are the 2 screws that we talked about earlier. So now that we have it on the rotor, we're going to screw in those screws because, like we said before, the caliper holes are threaded.
So the last step is to put the castle nut and washer on, because without it, the whole back assembly will pull itself apart. Okay, once that's tight, last thing, just put the wheel on. Always try to remember the washers.
So we just use the impact to tighten the lug nuts on.
And whenever you're tightening lug nuts, always make sure that when you tighten one that's directly across from it, because the wheel will shift as you tighten it. So you want to make sure that everything is squared up against the head.